The following program is brought to you by the Baker & Baker Foundation and is a production of the Columbia Museum of Art.
Hi, and welcome to the More Than Rhythm podcast. I'm Dr. Birgitta Johnson, host and ethnomusicologist. And we're back for the second season of More Than Rhythm, a Black music series. Today on Binder Podcast, we have a special guest, Adia Victoria. So when we think about the blues, I often think about the greats, B.B. King, Coco Taylor, even some of our lesser-known greats like Bobby Rush, but also our giants, Bobby Blue Bland, Muddy Waters. And if we go even further back, we think about the icons and the pioneers like Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey, Robert Johnson, Son House and Lead Belly, and the list goes on and on. As we go into the 21st century and thinking about the state of the blues as this foundational American music, as well as still being very much a vibrant part of American music culture and African American music culture, we wanted to have an actual time to look at the blues in the More Than Rhythm series and pay homage to this very fundamental genre where we see it at the root of so many popular music forms in America. So today, we're going to be talking about the blues. We're going to talk about the past and the present of the blues, but definitely talking about the future of the blues and some of our more contemporary artists. Fresh off a world tour and her third appearance at the Newport Folk Festival, More Than Rhythm, a Black music series welcomes Adia Victoria to the Columbia Museum of Art. Before finding a home in the blues, Adia studied ballet, acting, and wrote poetry, living in Paris, Brooklyn, and Atlanta before settling down in Nashville, Tennessee. After being given an acoustic guitar as a gift, Victoria taught herself to play by transforming her poetry into songs. Adia Victoria's music represents the contemporary power of the blues to evoke deep emotions using straightforward lyricism and raw observations of everyday life. A 21st century daughter of the blues, Adia Victoria made waves with her first album, Beyond the Bloodhounds, in 2016. Inspired by a line from Harriet Jacobs' book, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, the album earned the attention of the Rolling Stone magazine and audiences at South by Southwest and later NPR's Tiny Desk concert series for the Spartanburg, South Carolina native. Her most recent album, A Southern Gothic, includes influences from Southern literary figures and Southern Gothic novels, with collaborations from legendary singer-songwriter T-Bone Burnett on the single The South Gotta Change, and powerhouse vocals and music by Kishona Armstrong, Margot Price, and Jason Isbell on a cover of Blind Willie McTell's 1930s blues, You Were Born to Die. Adia Victoria is continuing to carry the baton for Black Southern blueswomen in a modern digital world. Her performance at More Than Rhythm will include her longtime collaborator and band member Mason Hickman on guitar and choreography by Aaron Bailey. So I want to kind of start our conversation off with some of my early thoughts about the blues. And I think about blues when I talk to my students in particular as this first example of African American music that's fully fleshed out folk music. It's particularly secular folk music by the time we get to the end of the 19th century. And you have experiences from the rural experience, towns, the urban experiences of African Americans really being put down in song by the time we get to the end of the 19th century. And even coming out of emancipation, the blues followed Black people as they traveled around the country. And you start to see the variety of the blues and the diversity of the blues as these communities grew. And the blues became what I like to quote theologian James Cone saying, this is the secular spiritual of Black communities, talking about the joys of life, the troubles in life. Even as emancipated peoples, they were very much still in a very oppressed society, as it were. And those blues, those storytelling songs, the kind of core of the blues, storytelling, that raw truth, became the voice of the Black community for a very, very long time and started to impact other genres. So when I say all that kind of preamble around the blues, and I think about all these greats and legends and how, of course, the blues becomes this popular genre and popular commercial genre, how do you, as a contemporary blues artist, think about the blues? What was your kind of first, memories of the blues as this distinct genre?
That is a loaded front end of the conversation, but I've always been a fan of just taking big bites and just jumping right in.
Yes,
and we're gonna chew on this together.
Chew. We like to chew.
We gonna eat.
Mm-hmm, yes, it's eat time.
I think about my introduction to the blues. I heard the blues without realizing that I was hearing the blues. This was back in the mid '90s. I grew up in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and we were listening to 107.3 jams. This must have been like 1996, I want to say. And the song "No Diggity" by Blackstreet came on.
Mm-hmm.
That rhythm, that piano. And that is a blues. It is a blues musical composition. The story of it is a blues. And then years later, when I got into Bill Withers, I realized that they were sampling Bill Withers, Grandma's Hands. And so when I think about the blues, for me, I think about its power is in its ability to mentalize the inner lives of Black Southern folk. These are lives and stories and perspectives that were denied to us by, the white dominant culture who assumed that we had no inner lives. They saw us as a mask and a shell, an empty shell of subhumanity. And the blues, it bears witness to the richness of our oral traditions, of our perspectives, of our location in the social hierarchy. And I think that was, for me, what drew me to the blues. When I was 22, I first began listening to Skip James and Victoria Spivey, who I call, Queen Victoria. Mm-hmm. She's one of the reasons why I used my middle name, Adia Victoria. It's an homage to her.
Oh yeah, that's great.
But it affirmed to me that I had a subjectivity. I had a point of view. I had a perspective that was as valid, if not more valid, than the polite white society's perspective that I was raised in, that I had my own personal truth and that I could turn my pain into blues. I could do something with myself. That was the blues gift to me as a young Black girl from Spartanburg, South Carolina, that I could do something with my stuff, my inner stuff.
Right. I love that. I love how you said that inner lives. The blues tells that story of these inner lives. Because for most of the history of the blues, African Americans couldn't do that. Black people couldn't be their full self in public. And when we think about your story and you saying in the 90s, still having these thoughts about battling these, how to get your true full self out in the world when you have a society that's very much married to that shell, married to that stereotype, married to those expectations. And then the blues being that kind of way to break down those kind of shields and barriers.
I'm going back south to Carolina, gonna plant myself under a magnolia, gonna let that day do its work, gonna plant myself.
I love how we're in a moment now when people are proud to identify as being Black and Southern. Because for a very, very long time, it was something that, we did, but people, when they would move away, they would, kind of mute their background. They wouldn't tell you where they were from. They said, I'm from somewhere. They'll name a big city close to where they're from. So Spartanburg, South Carolina, stand up. In the building. in the building. And I hear that in your music as well, the vastness of the South. And also, oddly enough, it reminds me of a couple of things. I think about when I heard Erykah Badu do Southern Girl. And everybody knew of Erykah with On and Tyrone and all that. But when she came out with Southern Girl and even just the a cappella track of a beatbox, I think Rozelle did the beatbox. And then she just started describing stuff of the Black Southern experience. It wasn't like a gimmick. She started naming stuff, the home of the chicken wing, the home of the Black and Mouse, all these types of symbols of Black pride. And when she just starts listing things off, it comes off very much as a very much blues-based version of what she typically did within the soul music genre. So that wave of people in the 90s, you think about Outkast representing this very Southern voice in hip hop, and that generation of artists saying, as Outkast said, the South got something to say, and defiantly so. It always has been that way. But in this case, seeing it in contemporary music, I just love hearing that. So I have a question. I saw this on the internet because we know we love the internet, and I was in the Googles. And so I read somewhere that a friend had given you a guitar and you used that to teach yourself how to play, but also to put songs to your poems, because I know you're a poet as well.
Yeah, I'm self-taught in all manners of my life. I shy away from institutions. almost like it's my business to do so. So I like to create links between what I know and then I use what I know to find out what I don't know. And I just incorporate what I don't know into my little bedrock of knowledge. So I knew I liked writing poems. I've been writing since I was a little girl. And having that guitar, it allowed me to flesh out and complete my writing, my composition, my stories. It gave it a backdrop. It gave it a mood and a vibe. And I think that ability to, for me, the blues is very much a body-based experience. I write my best blues lyrics and licks around the rhythm that I get when I'm walking around the city. And just being able to have the music in my hands at the tip of my fingers to help me tell my story. I think that it was very therapeutic for me. I think that it pulled something that was dormant inside of me. It gave me my body back. The blues did, in a certain way.
Wow. I love hearing that. That's so interesting that as you write, it's a fully embodied experience as the music is coming out of the whole self and then getting fleshed out, not just coming out and then you work it out somewhere else. It's actually kind of the process of this jointness between the thoughts, the words, the poems, but also the feelings and the physical tactile aspects of, playing the guitar and putting it together. So you get that from being self-taught more often than not because it becomes more of the doing of it until you get what you're hearing inside outwards.
How quiet this land, the site of Southern memory, exploded with centuries of our absences on macadam. I coil deeper into a swollen white myth. Live oak with claw hands signals the open water we washed in waves upon and then vanished. In great homes where the brown will be beaten off, the rice revealing a bone whiteness, the wisdom of mothers passed to daughters will birth an empire.
Another aspect of the blues that I see in your music that I really like is how a lot of times people forget that the blues includes a variety and a diverse array of like moods and emotions. Sometimes the stereotype is the blues is about, my man left me, I'm sad, I'm all broke down. But the blues has the highs, it has the lows, the spiritual, the mythical, defiance, the love, of course, and the lust, but also things like revenge and just lots of dimensions of the human experience. And so can you kind of speak about where that variety of moods comes from in your music? I'm thinking specifically of something like Troubled Mind. When I heard it, I had to listen to it over and over because I was like, wait, this is blues. But it's also, I remember you saying at Newport, the song began as a prayer.
Right. It's interesting. I think about, you're talking about the late 19th century and what was happening in the culture at that time in the Victorian age. You had Freud and Jung, trying to scratch down into the psyches of troubled white people and break that down. And, the talking cure, which is all well and good. But what was missing was very much the body was divorced out of the trauma, the story of trauma, just the body, like Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. You can talk all you want to, but if your healing stops at your neck, you have a whole body of pain that you aren't dealing with. And I found that the blues, those rhythms, the percussive elements of it, that relentless kind of circular drive to the blues, it was therapeutic to me. And now, you fast forward 120 years later, Western science is starting to talk about somatic healing and storytelling and more communal aspects and more embodied aspects of healing and trauma. And it's like the blues had that, from the jump off. Like we were very much connected to our bodies. I know from my childhood, growing up in the white evangelical Southern church, my body was stolen from me. It was, my flesh is sinful. So I very much disassociated from my body. I became just a walking mind in a way. And the blues gave me not just back my mind, it gave me back my body. Watching women like Victoria Spivey, watching Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith, listening to them, just seeing them own all of themselves. And it gave me power of my flesh. It showed me that my flesh was brilliant. I wasn't just a sack of a body. Like my body had knowledge to it. Like the blues is very much a body system of knowing. And in that way, it was like a therapy for me to kind of unravel all these stuck places that were in my actual flesh that I had exiled myself away from. The blues was like a homecoming, a bodily homecoming for me.
I stood up to the mountain, told the mountain, say my name. And if you're tired of walking, let the children lead the way. 'Cause I love you, I won't leave you, won't make you slip away. Come what may, we're gonna fight with way. The South gotta change.
Another song I was thinking about, and I think it got a lot of attention recently, South's Gotta Change, and that idea of defiance, of course. But I also hear in this song, particularly as a Southerner, there's a love of the South. Sometimes people think that, particularly being Black in the South, oh, you hate it. It's like, well, we're still here. A lot of us did not go into Great Migration. A lot of us stayed. A lot of us loved the South. And so it was this kind of idea of, like Baldwin said, you love something enough to challenge it. But I love that first verse where you're calling out a particular personality and identity of the South. When you say you've been running from the ghost, you keep it hidden in your past. The veil before your face is falling and it's falling fast. I won't go blindly in the night. I would drag you to the light. And so this idea of calling things out, speaking truth to power, but also walking with you. I think about your Toni Morrisons and your Maya Angelou's and the aspect of how they talk about the humanity getting beyond these particular challenges. But in this case, talking about the South mentality where the reckoning is coming, you can't keep dwelling in cognitive dissonance. It's a fancy $13 words. However, in the song, the South's Gotta Change. It really covers that in a particular way that we typically don't hear. It's always people at odds across the table from each other. But this is one of those challenging things we see with the newer generations where it's like, no, we're going to have allies. This is not going to be one or the other. If we're going to survive this, it has to be together in this case. And consistently saying, in this piece, the South's Gotta Change. How did you come to this piece?
Yeah, when I wrote that song, I thought about a lot of the friendships that I had in my youth, my early 20s, and I was a prolific liar. I was, due to my shame. The lies were ways that I created distance, not only between me and the people around me, but between me and myself. When I lied about myself, I was able to distance myself from a shameful aspect of myself. And the lies were exhausting and they were hard to keep up with. And then the lies start hunting you. And I started thinking about, white Southerners, the amount of cognitive dissonances that they have to maintain in order to not, be completely broken down in order to maintain the facade. And I know these people because they raised me. I grew up in their homes. I grew up in their church. I grew up in their schools. I grew up at their knees. So who better than an insider who knows the lie to tell them, have you ever had a friend that you knew was lying to your face? Just like, aren't you tired of this? Like, who are you doing this for? Because I know the truth and I'm still here with you. And I think that that's a certain amount of grace, is to not stand in judgment of someone, but to say, like, I'm going to walk beside you because I have been you before. I've been a liar. I've been an oppressor. And so I don't see myself as a righteous character in this song. I'm a sinner. I'm fallen. And so I know that redemption is possible, but it requires you to give up the crutch that is the lie. And I came up with this song, in the summer of 2020, following the lynching of George Floyd, following the passing of Representative John Lewis. And I thought about him telling young people to get into good trouble. What was he really asking of them? And it was telling the truth of yourself, owning yourself enough that you can stand up to power. And usually power is held by people who are powerfully afraid. And so if you can relate to someone who is acting in fear, if you can tell them that their fear is not the biggest part of them, you can really move some mountains together.
I love it. I love it. And if you're tired of walking, let the children lead the way.
Oh yeah. The children, they've got the least loyalty to this system. It's like there is a vested interest that children have to change this because we don't want to live under the same chaos that engulfed our parents and grandparents and what have you.
Hey y'all, Wilson Boehm here. More Than Rhythm is back for its second season, and we are excited to bring you even more concerts and events celebrating Black music in America. On December 8th, violinist, arranger, composer, conductor, and Columbia, South Carolina native Nicole Neely joins Dr. Birgitta Johnson and Hassan Anderson, University of South Carolina Assistant Professor of Oboe, to talk about the impact of Black composers and musicians in American classical music. Neely then takes the stage with her string quartet, the Black Exchange, to perform a range of pieces showcasing the diversity of today's art music scene. You can learn more about More Than Rhythm concerts, listening parties, and film showings on our website, www.columbiamuseum.org. Now, back to the show, and I'll see you at the next concert.
When I first started listening to the blues, I got into folks like Skip James and Robert Johnson and Mississippi Fred McDowell, and I noticed that they were always talking about this woman who seemed so mean. It was like the devil was inside of her. And what they didn't talk about was who made this woman so mean. So I wanted to let this mean-hearted woman speak. This song is called Mean-Hearted Woman.
For people who may not be familiar with Adia's work, her latest album, A Southern Gothic, was inspired partly by you looking at some literature, and the power of literature and poetry in your work is throughout. But in this case, I think you mentioned that you were looking at some Southern literature in a bookstore and looking at the Southern Gothic traditions and looking at different authors to inspire some of your songs and poetry from this project. How did that happen? It was in the bookstore, or was this a deeper dive into Southern literature?
It was at a bookstore. It's one of my favorite antique bookstores here in Nashville. And they have the Southern literature section, and they're all white authors, the same big names, Flannery O'Connor, Eudora Welty, your Faulkners and what have you. And there was no Black writers in there. And the Black Southern writers were in a different section, like African American and civil rights, and which is as Southern as, Alice Walker can stand up to Faulkner, as far as I'm concerned. She's just as Southern as he is. But it's a question of, when we say the word Southerner, who do you imagine? Typically you think of a white person, you think of cowboy boots, and it's just another way that our contributions to the culture are the foundations of this culture. The way that what are the roots of Southern culture are denied. And I thought what it would be to place myself in the center of a Southern tradition, Southern Gothic tradition, and have it be from my viewpoint. What would I see as grotesque? What would I see as alien or foreign or strange or bizarre? What would be uncanny to a Black Southern girl, in white culture? And giving that the ability to stand shoulder to shoulder with a Faulkner or a Welty or an O'Connor.
I love it. When the blues was at its height initially, we think about the blues era of the 20s and 30s. It was happening around the same time as the Harlem Renaissance. And so there was this walking together of literary figures and blues artists. So you had people like Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes, talking about the blues, sometimes writing in blues forms, taking blues songs and turning them into poems. And Hurston Baker, even down to our Black arts movement poets like Amiri Baraka and Sonia Sanchez. This blues and literature and poetry kind of parallel as these kind of almost like a conversation back and forth, like call and response between literary works in Black culture and the blues themselves. And so we look at some schools, they like to categorize blues as low culture or only working class, but it had this other life within the Black community where you saw Black artists saying, no, the blues is our actual voice. It is our literary voice, and how that poetry and those things are coming together, share something. They share the rhythms. They share the topics. They share the language in some cases. A lot of those authors were breaking down barriers around the English language, saying we're going to use vernacular Black English in our poems because this is the rhythm of how Black people speak. And we're going to put this in a poetry book or a novel. I like how, I don't want to use the word cerebral, but I love how cerebral it becomes in some of your music because you can hear the lyrics and then you see them on the page. It's like, oh, this is actually like a built, fully fleshed out poem or poetic verse happening right here. It has this kind of rhythm and flow, and it's musical, but it also has this kind of literary poet, feel to it. And so for me, when I listen to a lot of your music, it also has this feeling of an epic undergirding some of the music, this expanse. This reminds me of the South. When I think about driving through the highways and driving outside of the cities in the South, it just reminds me of that a lot. So I remember another quote, I think you may have said this, how the blues is a spiritual conversation between the land and the people around you. I know you grew up in Spartanburg, so how does that aspect of your background tap into that aspect of being a Southerner and this land connection to the music?
Yeah. I always get a chuckle when people try and down talk, rural, quote unquote, working class Black folk. It's like, do you understand the cunning and the wit and the intelligence of our people? Do you understand that they knew who to bring down here to engineer wealth? They brought us over here for our skills. They bought engineers and they bought scientists and they bought ecologists to create the drainage systems to cultivate rice, which made the crown jewel in the British Empire. It was the wealthiest place because of our brilliance, because they didn't know how to do it. They bought masons and they bought architects. We weren't just, Sambos sitting underneath a tree. Like, we knew how to build. And so I think of the wisdom of the rural people that I come from in Spartanburg. I think of my Uncle Bill a lot, who could grow a crop out of a rock in Inman, South Carolina. I think about the wit and the humor and the irony that these Black folks had in order to survive, this system that was dead set on killing them. So these were very intelligent minds, and the ability to see your humanity in the kudzu, in the red clay, in the moss, in the cotton. And that is an advanced level of intellect. And to be able to create an art form that endures from that is brilliance. And so I've never had the need to elevate the blues into some, acceptable, respectable, intellectual realm. It was brilliant to begin with at its foundation, at its founding. And I stand in awe. I don't just see the blues as a 1-4-5 progression. I see it as a school of philosophy that stands shoulder to shoulder with a Rousseau or a Russell or, any other Western philosophical white man, many thinker. I think that it is more enlightened than the Enlightenment. I think that it is more timeless and enduring. And there's a reason why people are still bumping the blues from 1920s and no one's listening to 1920s pop music. That doesn't speak to us now. But the blues that was created in the fields, that was created in by chain gang workers, that endures. That is testimony to its brilliance. And it never needed to be elevated any higher than what it was. The people that created the blues were brilliant. They were artists. And I always get a little chuffed when people talk about, the folklore behind Robert Johnson going to the crossroads and sold his soul to the devil so he could learn how to play music. It's like, no, screw that. This was an artist who was so determined and singularly driven that he would practice for hours and hours.
Right.
So give these people their dues, know?
The crossroad thing was, as we call it now, it was a marketing hook at this point, because it was a good story to tell to people who were outside of the community, basically.
Yeah. But you got to ask, why did they need that story? Because they couldn't believe that a Black man had the discipline and the vision and the talent to sit there and hone his craft.
It was a long road that led to you. It was a darkness that fed you. Sister, I can't say no more. Under the clouds I found you, cutting through the ground like kudzu. Sister, I can't say no more.
we think about the blues, original blues women of the 20s, and even we look at the 60s and 70s, how blues women had to fight in the industry to get those places, even though they were more popular. They might have sold more records, but they still had to fight to get platforms and spaces. How is it now on this kind of diverse platform for the blues and roots music? How is it being a woman in that same atmosphere or climate?
I've always just walked forward the truth that this is my legacy. Like, I believe that, I'm the direct musical descendant of a Skip James, of a Ma Rainey, of a Bessie Smith. So I really have nothing to prove, and I can only really speak to my own experience. But I walk forward in the confidence that this is the work of my ancestors, and I'm sharing something cultural with you. Like, whatever I choose to do with the blues is authentic blues. People will tell me, like, you've got a seat at the table. And it's like, no. You have a seat at my table. I've invited you to my table. This is an invitation to you. Like, don't get it twisted. It's kind of like the idea of stealing someone's property and selling it back to them. So I go in with full ownership, knowing that I'm willing to share something with these white people, and they should consider themselves to be blessed to even be in my presence. I know it's arrogant, but it's true.
Well, no, I don't think it's arrogant. It's very much Zora Neale Hurston self-possessed. Because that's kind of how she dealt with it in her era, even as an anthropologist and a folklorist. That's how she dealt with it. She was like, I'm not polishing this stuff up. This is how my people talk. We are the geniuses. We are the creative geniuses. And she didn't get the fame in her lifetime because she was going so much against the grain, because she chose to put the Black voice, the Black experience at the center, the language at the center, the stories at the center unapologetically, and seeing that as, like you said, as a legacy. Because sometimes people, they kind of shy away from, I don't want to be compared to. But when you start thinking about, as you mentioned, this legacy of women speaking truth to power, women speaking out, women being voices for women, that's what the blues is. And I love when artists own that legacy. That one, that means they know the legacy. Two, they mean they understand they are walking in it for a contemporary audience. And so one of my last things, and related to, I guess, gender, is I remember seeing at Newport, you put a song, one of your older songs, in the set, because I think that was right around when the Roe versus Wade decision came down, or reversal came down. And you said some weird stuff going on out here. And so you sang Heathen and brought that back. And so can you speak about that choice, or what inspired that? I know it was very necessary, but how that came to be in that particular space.
Yeah, Heathen was a song that I wrote way back in 2012. It's one of my earliest songs. And I wrote it after a summer that I spent in Paris studying French. It was an insight that I had of just how divorced I'd become from my sexuality, from my own flesh, the pleasure of my flesh growing up in the church. Like I mentioned earlier, I was guided back into that sense of self-possession by the blues women who told me that I had permission to seek pleasure. And Heathen is a song where it's like, you say I'm a heathen, but why won't you leave me alone? It's very much a song of me claiming my autonomy, of telling men, like, brother, you need to get back. Like, this is not yours. I may share it with you, but it's not yours. And so I wanted to end the set at Newport, with Heathen. It was very last minute. We weren't supposed to, but I felt like I needed to speak that message out into the world from that stage, because what we're seeing right now happening with the Supreme Court and Roe v. Wade being overturned is that these white men will never get tired of trying to possess other people's bodies because they lack any real sense of self-possession.
Yeah. And the patriarchy is definitely not just limited to white men. In my world, I also deal with sacred music and gospel music. And there are bishops right now literally trying to send Beyonce to hell because of her song Church Girls. So there was a particular Church of God in Christ bishop who literally said she's going to hell because of that song. And oddly enough, that song is saying exactly what you're saying, kind of talking about girls in the church having to reclaim their bodies, reclaim themselves and their joy in a system that's saying, you're heathen, you're going to hell, you're going to all these things. And so I see these same issues across genre for women, particularly Black women in music, and having art resonate with regular women who say, yes, I experienced that. That's what I'm going through. And this artist, this person is speaking my truth.
I never bother to ask. I never bother with please. I never bother with excuse me, miss, begging pardon, darling. That ain't for me. I like to do things my way, right on to them at all. 'Cause first they'll ask you to compromise, and the next breath demanding you crawl. Y'all, I guess that makes me a heathen, quite possibly.
We mentioned The South's Gotta Change. One of the producers on that was T-Bone Burnett. You also collaborate with different artists. Another song I like was You Was Born to Die with Kashana Armstrong. And like this kind of almost super team of young ladies coming together and having this very almost kind of churchy, bluesy sound. How do you come into collaborations as an artist?
Well, I mean, for me, it's natural. The blues for me is community. It's a communal practice. It's your people. And I was able, during the course of the pandemic, all my friends were home. We weren't touring. We weren't busy. So it was very easy to just send a text to Jason Isbell, be like, hey, you want to hop on guitar? Text Kishona Armstrong, who is also from South Carolina, and be like, hey, do you want to put some vocals? Margot Price, And so it was a very honest, just coming together. And we recorded that song. It's a Blind Willie McTell song from 1933. It's a blues standard. But I knew I wanted to pay homage to him. And I knew that it wasn't something that I wanted to do solo. I had to bring my friends along. And yeah, it was that's the blues to me. I picture the blues as a circle with my friends, and it's sharing sacred space and creating art together.
Blues, that's community. I love it. That's one of my vision board words we do in our classes. We give, what do you think about when you think about the blues? And community comes up very frequently. I'm very happy to still hear that being said. And another one of your collaborators, I must mention, we're going to see him in a couple of weeks when you come to the museum. Mason Hickman, your guitar player, your creative partner. And apparently, can I share the news? I don't know if this is new news.
Oh, my fiance.
Your fiance. Your fiance. So yeah. So how is it working with Mason? How did that partnership get going?
Mason and I, we've been playing music together now for 10 years. He was in grad school at Vanderbilt when he joined my band. And he's just like the perfect partner for me. Like, he's able to take a lot of my vision and make it manifest. He understands while I'm spinning out, what about this? And he's doing the calculations. He's a structural engineer. He's a doctor of engineering. So he's able to engineer my vision. And his guitar playing, mine is a lot more rooted and rootsy. I'm kind of like we always joke, I'm the Tom York to his Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead. I'm the visionary. He's the mad scientist. And so we have this common way of seeing music and Southern music. He and his family are both from South Carolina, generations back. So I think we have this commonality that we're able to see and understand each other as Southerners. I'll say something to him like, man, this song needs to have more of like the tangle of like a kudzu in it. I need that feeling, or I want it to sound hotter than like an August night in Spartanburg. And he knows what I'm talking about production wise. So he's able to get where I'm coming from.
I love it. And I believe we are coming to a close in our conversation. Thank you for joining us today. And I think that's it. I think we're good.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
The More Than Rhythm podcast is a production of the Columbia Museum of Art. Recording and editing by Drew Barron. Today's episode was hosted by Dr. Birgitta Johnson. And today's guest was Adia Victoria, whose performance with guitarist Mason Hickman you heard throughout the episode. Additional production for this series is done by me, Wilson Bain. Funding for this series is made possible by the Baker & Baker Foundation, and this program is supported by a Connected Communities grant from Central Carolina Community Foundation. This program has been made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy demands wisdom. See you next time.
That's my time, South Carolina. Thank you for making me the woman I am. I love y'all. I do it for y'all. This is for my people. Thank you.